Thank you everyone for joining the Pennsylvania Dental Association for tonight's webinar on interview tips. We are honored to have our speaker, Dr. Charles Incalcaterra, presenting tonight. He retired as the director of the general practice residency at Lehigh Valley Hospital in 2022 after serving 27 years and mentoring over 100 residents. He is still an attending dentist at that hospital, as well as Christiana Hospital in Wilmington, Delaware. He also retired from private practice in April of 2024, almost 1 year ago, after 40 years in practice. He is a member of the Pennsylvania Dental Association, the American Dental Association, Second District Dental Association, and the Lehigh Valley Dental Society. He has served in many leadership positions throughout his membership, most recently as the president of the Pennsylvania Dental Association in 2019 to 2020. He is also a member of the International College of Dentists, Pierre Fauchard Dental Academy, and the American College of Dentists. He also serves as a delegate to the American Dental Association. Dr. Incalcaterra has a lot of experience with advanced training enrollees and is very knowledgeable in guiding dental students and new dentists. We are so pleased to have him sharing his knowledge with you tonight as we jump into tonight's presentation on interview tips. And if you have any questions, please type them in the chat and we will answer them at the end. Go ahead, Dr. Incalcaterra.
All right, thank you, Amanda. Thank you for the introduction and welcome everybody that's here tonight for this interview lecture that's being put on by the PDA. I understand that there's a number of dental students from Temple, Penn, Pitt, LECOM, and I believe there's somebody from Howard that might be joining us today. So welcome all. As Amanda said, I've been the residency director at Lehigh Valley Health Network for a number of years. And over the years, the way I developed this lecture was that in the past, the residents would give me their contracts to take a look at. And I developed a contract lecture based on all the different things that I saw in the contracts, good and bad. And that lecture, actually, I hope you can join us on April 8th. That's a week from tonight to go over that lecture. That's quite a bit of information that we'll be presenting there tonight. And if you're in the process of interviewing now and looking at contracts for the future, either this year or next year, whatever time you're looking at, this is a very valuable presentation. But for the interviews, I just sort of thinking about, the residents have all given me contracts to take a look at, but what happens in their interview process. So I decided to create an interview lecture as well. So we're going to start tonight. And as Amanda said, if there's any questions, just put them in the chat. I'll try to get to those at the end of the presentation. But again, welcome tonight. And if I could just get my screen to advance. There we go. So we always start with an objective when I do a lecture, and I want to give you the idea of what we're going to be talking about tonight. So by the end of this lecture, you'll have the ability to be familiar with the interview process itself, know how to prep for the interview in advance. We're going to talk about questions that you should ask, as well as those that may be asked of you, and know some interview follow-up strategies. And one other thing that I didn't put in the objective is at the end, we're going to kind of tease next week's lecture, and it'll be the understand what questions you should ask when offered a contract. So those are the main lecture objectives for this evening. So as you know, you all have gone through dental school interviews probably. Some of you may be or have interviewed at residency programs or advanced programs. It's very stressful, but exciting time for both you and the hiring practice. Be aware that you're both interviewing each other. They want to interview you, but they also want you to learn about them as well. So it's important that you understand that there's a give and take there. There's different methods that are in place when you go for an interview. I've had times where of course, you're going to meet the doctor, but there's been times where there's not the doctor there, but the practice manager might be doing the pre-interviews, the first interviews. So you might be meeting that person. There was also a time when a resident told me that there was actually a consultant who was working with the practice who did the interview. And it might even be a virtual interview, especially if it's from a distance and, instead of traveling, you might be able to do a virtual interview. So be prepared and know who you're interviewing with when you get there, make sure that you have an understanding of who you're speaking with. So they're an opportunity to not only for the practice to learn about you, but also for you to learn about the practice. So it's an important time for you to really explore the practice and learn as much as you can during your time there. Ultimately, you're in control of your own destiny. That means that, you make the final decision on which practice you want to join. And hopefully you'll have a lot of opportunities to interview at different practices so you get a great variety and different looks at different types of practices that are out there. It's important that you relax, make sure you breathe, be yourself. Try to exude some confidence, but don't be overly bold or show too much swagger. Being humble is a lot more important, I think, in an interview process. So just keep that in mind as well. I may have mentioned this, but be open to a variety of opportunities and locations. A lot of people sometimes are stuck on a particular location, and that, may be valid because there might be family there or some other reason that you may be in a particular area. But if you open your mind and take a look at a lot of different opportunities, you'll see that there's quite a bit of differences out there, and go to as many interviews as you can. Be open to different practice locations. Many of the best opportunities are actually in rural areas where there are fewer practices, so there's less competition, and you can actually earn a higher salary in some of those areas. It's important that you get help in preparing your resume. You can go online to check Google for resource on formatting, etc. And there's another lecture coming up on CVs. I don't know what this person is going to say, but I do recommend that you put a photo in your resume. Some people are against that, but I like the idea of a photo because if there's a number of different applicants that are going for this particular position and you have your photo, you might stand out a little bit. Obviously, don't put anything like your social security number or date of birth on that document, just your contact information, whether that be phone or email or however else you want to be contacted. And as far as personal references, oftentimes I've seen resumes that have the personal references listed on the resume. I would recommend not putting that on there. I would just put at the bottom that uh, references are available on request, and have a separate sheet of paper with those lists of references. So if the practice asks you for a list of those references, you could hand them a separate piece of paper with that on there. Make sure that you let your references know in advance that you're going to a lecture, to an interview, so that you can prepare them in case they do get a call. So just let them know what the name of the practice is and that they may be contacted by them in advance. So it's important to do a little bit of research before you go to your interview. As you mentioned, as I mentioned earlier, you want to evaluate the location. Look at the practice's website, look at any social media posts that they have. That's a good source of getting an idea of what the practice is about. Check their online ratings, but be very, very cautious about a few negative ones. There hasn't been a restaurant that I've seen that's had everything a perfect rating. There's always somebody that's upset about something. So that's typical to see that. If you see a lot of negative rankings, that's kind of a red flag. But for the most part, take a look at their online reviews and see what other people are saying about them. You can check the State Board of Dentistry website if you wish to see if there's any violations. I think that would be wise to do, but also if a practice has a lot of violations, it's hard to see that they would be in practice any longer. And if you have any local specialists in the area that you know about, you could speak to them. If you're coming into the Lehigh Valley and you know an oral surgeon that's up here, you could certainly talk to that oral surgeon and let them give you some information that they can about the practice if they're comfortable with that. And then make sure that the practices of values align with your own. And that's with respect to their professional approach, their patient mix, their financial stability, their philosophy of treatment. That's very important. So you can get some of that information off their website and social media posts as well. If you can, I think it's very important to create yourself a portfolio of some of the cases that you're working on. You could also just put in treatment plans, but if you have any photos of patients that you obviously make sure that they're blacked out as far as their identifying features, but of their pre and post-op condition, that would be helpful. Any treatment plans, any photos that you have are great. Statistics, it's a little hard in dental school, I understand, to create an idea of your statistics because you have to do a certain amount of requirements, but you're also in a 2 year plus time period. So if you do 6 crowns in 2 years, that's not really a lot, and it's hard to really kind of gauge how that's going to affect you in the future as far as your skills are concerned. But if you do go into a residency program, you can kind of get those statistics a little easier. Remember that you're not in school 52 weeks a year, working 40 hours a week. So what I think it's important to do is take an idea of how quickly you can do a particular procedure. So for example, if you were doing a crown prep, and I know, what it takes to get a patient seated and get them numb and check with the docs and everything to make sure that everything is okay to go. But once you start that drill and put that drill to tooth, I would then kind of set the clock and see how long it takes you actually to prep the whole tooth. And if you have to stop and have the professor come over and take a look at it again, stop your clock. When they say go ahead and do some refinements, start the clock again, and just get an idea of your speed as far as, doing some of the procedures like that. Same thing on an endo. I know sometimes the endos are not such a high priority in school as they were when I was a resident and student. But again, you could kind of speed check yourself on how long it takes you to do an anterior endo, say. And then highlight anything that you really like doing. If you like surgery, if you like perio, if you like endo, that's great. Highlight those specialty procedures that you like. Be honest also about the procedures that you don't like. If you don't like working with kids, if you don't like doing surgical extractions, such like that, it's fine to be honest about that. And so kind of highlight your likes and your dislikes when you have the opportunity to give that information during the interview. So talking about the face-to-face interview at this time, it's very important to make a good impression on everyone. I have a story about Lehigh Valley Health Network when I was being asked to help interview the new director of education that was coming in for the hospital, not just for dentistry, but for the entire hospital. And what I was told is that the guards at the front, the people that check in at the front, know this person is coming, and they know what they look like. And the person that is in the secretary at the front of the C-suite, the area where all the CEOs and everything are. That secretary knows that this person coming and knows what they look like, and obviously greets them. And what's going on in the background is that you don't realize is that everybody is ratting out on this person. So if this person comes in and acts real pompous to the front desk and acts kind of like a jerk to the secretary, but then comes in and does a great interview, well, what happens is they get reported on how they interact with every single person in the hospital that they ran into. So it was a very nice way to find out that people can put on great airs and make themselves look really, really great, but in reality their personalities aren't that nice. So it's very important that you make a great impression on everybody that you meet. Whether it's the front desk, the assistants, the hygienists, whoever it is that's there. And if the front desk has business cards, ask them for a business card, and I'll talk to you a little bit later about why that's important. It's important to show a positive attitude, be pleasant, smile, show interest. You can see a positive attitude, but if I'm interviewing you, I can't tell about your clinical skills. So knowing your attitude is going to be a very important part of my interview with you if you come into my practice. Show sincere interest in the practice's situation. Try to find out why they are looking to add you to the team. Did they just lose an associate? Or are they growing and they need to meet demand? Or is the dentist thinking about retirement and looking for a transition? So you may want to try to find out what's going on with the practice and find out their situation so you can be a little bit more understanding of their needs. And at the end of the interview, if you are interested in them, I would give them some positive feedback. Things like, I like what I've seen here. I see your practice philosophy matches mine. I think I would fit in very well in this practice. Those are some positive things that you can give them before you end the interview. If you're not interested, I would still leave some neutral comments. Just say, hey, you have a very nice office. Thank you for your time. But I wouldn't go overboard in praising them if you're really, really not interested. Don't leave with a negative comment to anybody at all, of course. Just try to make it very neutral if you're not happy with the practice after you had your interview. So we're going to talk a little bit about practices, some of the questions that you may be asked, and I'll give you some recommended answers for one or two of these so that you can kind of help out with thinking about your answers. And what I'm going to really recommend is that if you want to screenshot this or write these down or take a photo, whatever you want to do, but when you get to these questions, you may want to practice out loud your answers, because I think it's better to be prepared and kind of not be caught off guard. Now, I'm not going to give you every question that somebody can think of. It's obviously somebody's going to come up with a question that I'm not even thinking of, but I think it's important to kind of get these basic ones down and start practicing your answers so that you can feel a little bit more comfortable and natural when you're going through this. So the one is, what can you bring to this practice? For example, what skills do you have, or how can you help the practice grow? So some of the things you might want to say is like, I'm always prepared. I'm flexible though if things change. I strive to do my best at all times. I'm a team player. I'm adaptable. I can work with different personalities. I treat others with respect and empathy. I'm accountable, respectful, I'm efficient, and I'm dedicated to lifelong learning. Those are some of the things that you might be able to use to sell yourself in what can you bring to this practice. We talked a little bit about what procedures you enjoy the most and which are most challenging to you. Again, honestly, there is very important. You might find that it's a practice that's heavily into pedo, and that may be something you don't like, or maybe something you love. So you want to be honest about what different procedures you enjoy and which that you find most difficult. How much time will you need for a single crown, a molar, endo, et cetera? We talked a little bit about that already. Again, try to set that clock and time yourself. Different practices have different ways of doing crowns. The crown is probably the gold standard of how long does it take you to do this. But this could be a practice that has a large advance. They might be doing scanning. They might have the assistant do the scanning. They might have assistants or EFTAs making the temporary crown and cementing that. So is the question, how long does it take me to start from anesthetizing the patient to doing all of that, doing the prep, the impression, and making the temporary and cementing it on? Or is it how much time do I need to actually prep the tooth and then move on to the next patient? So that's something you may want to try to find out a little bit about the practice, how they do some of the procedures. Do they have EFTAs and other advanced practitioners that may help you along, or is it something that you have to do all along yourself? What are your future plans? Now, this could be a trick question. Um, it may show your commitment to the practice. If you say, oh, I'm going to be here for a year and then I'm moving back to California to be with my family, well, that's going to kind of be a negative thing. So you have to be very cagey and careful about how you answer this if your plans are to leave. Your future plans and your long-term goals might be to purchase a practice, gain additional continuing education, go to some advanced hands-on courses to refine your skills. Those may be some of your future plans that you can say without really letting on if you're not going to be there for a long time. So just be kind of cautious about that. And know that, you're not allowed to, the interviewers are not allowed to ask about your any kind of, your marriage or plans or personal relationships and things like that. That's not allowed to be asked. So they may be trying to ask you that by asking what your future plans are, trying to get around that question a little bit. So just be careful about that. How would you handle a difficult or upset patient or parent? Tell me about your people management skills. Have you had any conflicts with staff members or professors or attendings if you're in a hospital residency program? And how did you dissolve that? How did you resolve that? Sorry, not dissolve, resolve that. So again, talking about a little bit about interpersonal skills. Describe your personality in a few sentences. And a good thing you can do is talk to your classmates. Ask them, just give me a sentence or two how you would describe my personality. You could be a type A person, you could be relaxed and laid back. You could say I have a good sense of humor, but I know when to use it best. I'm serious, I'm tense, I'm, very, very, worked up. So those are the type of things that they're looking for as far as asking about your personality. Are you open to working late or on weekends? When we get into the contracts, we're going to talk about the hours, and I think that should be spelled out in a contract. But they may be wanting to see if they have the ability to work late in the evening. They may be wanting to expand their hours or open on a Saturday or Sunday, whatever the place may be. So that's something they may be asking you as well. And then what are you looking for as an associate in this practice? And there's many different ways you can approach that. You could be looking for independence on skills you're comfortable with, but you want some advice and mentoring on treatment planning and difficult cases. So, however you feel about your skills and your abilities, be honest again about that. If you feel that you can be very independent and everything, that's kind of what you're looking for. If you're looking for somebody to kind of collaborate with, especially when it comes to treatment planning or difficult cases. Be aware of that as well. Another thing, and I'm going to talk to you on the next slide about salary. My mantra there is never start off asking about salary. However, and I don't have this question on the slide, there's a slight chance you may be asked about your salary expectations. And if that's the case, I'd be prepared by doing some math ahead of time. So I'm just going to throw out numbers and whether these are real or not. But let's say you want to make $200,000 next year. Okay, and you're going to work 200 days. You're going to work 4 days a week for 50 weeks. That's 200 days in a year. So that means that you need to make $1,000 a day, which is about $125 an hour on an 8-hour day. That's not unreasonable. But you also need to realize, and we're going to talk about different compensation methods at the next lecture, about the fact that you're not making $1,000 to take home. You have to make the practice close to $3,000 or $4,000 in order to bring home $1,000 a day. So that's something that, again, if you do get asked about your salary expectations, think about ahead of time, what your expectations are. And you may want to do a little research and see what the average is. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but that's certainly a reasonable thing. Hygienists are getting $50, $60 an hour now, maybe more in some spots. So, asking for $125 as a professional, I don't think is unreasonable, but that's just an idea. So that's just a little bit about salaries, but as you see at the bottom of this slide, never lead off the question about compensation or benefits, okay? That's something that will be addressed in the future if you're offered a position or a contract. If they happen to bring that information up during the interview, as I said, it's certainly welcome to discuss that, but never lead off and never bring that up. Just kind of let that off to the side. And if you do get offered a contract, that information will be in there. So just wanted to remind you about that. All right. So what should you ask? And one of the first things is what is it practices treatment philosophies? So you may find this on the website. You may already see that they have a mission statement or their philosophy of practice, that they're a patient-centered practice, or they're a practice that is looking for a niche, trying to do high-end personalized things for patients that are willing to afford that. So that's the type of thing you want to find out so that to make sure that your philosophy of practice matches that. What would your expectations of me as an associate be? Would I be limited to certain procedures? Would I be doing a lot of hygiene visits? You've probably heard talk, there's a shortage of workforce right now. Hygienists especially are in demand. And I've heard of some practices hiring new associates and giving them a lot of hygiene. And that's kind of okay for a limited time, but it's not okay for a long term because your hourly rate of what you can make as a hygiene, as doing hygiene is not as high as it would be if you're doing crowns and other high-end procedures like that. So just ask them about what your expectations would be. What's the schedule? What's the on-call duties that are required? So what days of the work week would I work? What hours are there? Would there be any expectations for after hours duties? Would you be expected to go in by yourself if there's an after hours call, or would they have a staff person available if somebody had to go in on the weekend or such like that? Personally, in my own practice, I didn't even know where my stuff was. My staff made sure that they hid things from me. So if I did have to go in on the weekend, I would have to call them and say, "Hey, are you available to come in for an hour? I have an emergency." I barely knew how to take an X-ray with the digital X-ray, so it was kind of job security for them. But they were also willing to come in if they needed to on a weekend. And oftentimes you can handle things over the phone, but there's certain times you actually have to go into the office. So find out what that expectation is. And again, even though we're not talking about compensation, a question is, am I going to be considered an independent contractor or an employee of the practice? That's important, and we're going to get into that a lot more next week. But an independent contractor, you'll find out, has to pay a lot more in taxes, whereas an employee has some of the taxes taken out by the practice, and you don't have to pay as much in taxes. You also have some benefits that might be available to you where you don't as an independent contractor. So it's a question that you may want to find out. But again, when you come to next week's presentation, you'll hear a lot more about that and you'll see what that means. All right, some more questions you should ask. What specific things are you looking for an associate to bring to this practice? Again, are they looking for you um, to grow the practice? Are they looking for you to provide, again, a lot of hygiene? What are they looking for you to bring into the practice? Again, we're going to talk about this a little bit more next time. What insurance plans do you participate with? That's important because there's two types of um, ways of handling a practice. One is an indemnity practice. Indemnity means that they charge their full fee. So if a crown is $1,200 and a patient's insurance covers $600, they collect the $600 from the patient to get their full 1,200. If they belong to a PPO that has price limits or fee limits, and that $1,200 crown, they only pay $800 on that. And that means that instead of producing a $1,200 crown, you're producing $800 worth of work. So again, if you're trying to get to that $125 an hour and you're only getting paid $800 for a crown instead of 1,200 because they accept that insurance, then you're going to have to work harder and see more patients to get to that goal. So knowing what type of insurance plans they participate with, whether they do a lot of, full fee for service, or if they accept a lot of discounted fees is an important thing for you. And to go along with that, what are the practices, policies as far as payment, collections, and insurance? Again, if they participate with a lot of insurances that are low paying, you need to know that. Do they collect the money up front from patients? And do they have policy, or do they bill patients and wait for the money to come in? Or do they do things like care credit where the payment comes in and then the patient pays back the credit card company? So there's a lot of different questions that you're going to ask. And again, we're going to talk about a lot more of that as far as how that affects your salary. Describe your patient base. Do they have a lot of families? Do they have a lot of older patients? Do they have a lot of young kids? So you need to know that. Again, how do you get the practice to grow? Are they actively marketing their practice, or do they depend on a lot of referrals? Do they use social media? Which platforms do they use? Would you be expected to contribute to social media platforms to help the practice grow? So it's important as well. And what are the current and future goals of the practice? Where does the practice look like in 5 to 10 years? Do they see themselves that, again, the dentist might be looking at a retirement plan and looking to try to sell their practice to somebody that's coming in. Or they might be saying, no, we're going to expand, we're going to bring more dentists in, we're going to enlarge, we're going to move to a larger facility. So it's important that you know what the future goals of the practice are. And another question that I don't have on here is you may want to ask if they're referring a lot of cases out of the practice. Again, if you like doing kids and they have a lot of kids in the practice that they're referring to a pediatric practice, that would be helpful to know that you're going to be doing a lot more children in the practice, again, help them to maintain their practice base. So that's another question to ask. What kind of referrals are they doing? So I think this is really important, and I'm going to read you a little bit of an article I read shortly, but I just wanted to go over this. Remember in the beginning I said ask for the business card of the front desk person if they have one. So I think it's really, really important that you handwrite a personal thank you note to the practice if you're really, really happy with them. So as soon as you get out of the practice, your interview's over, you've had a good interview, go sit in your car, write a personal thank you note by hand, put a stamp on it, make sure you buy a couple of stamps, have that stamp ready, put your return address on it, go to the nearest post office, go on Waze, get the nearest post office, drop that in the box, and hopefully that letter will get there tomorrow or the next day. That's so important, I think, to do that because it's going to show a strong level of interest and a really personal touch, which I think is missing if you just do a text or an email or something like that. So this was an article that was in my local paper, and it was actually from from the Los Angeles Times back last Thursday. And it's an article about the virtue of saying thank you. And the person writes, my parents taught me early on that there's a difference between saying thank you and writing thank you. The spoken thank you is fleeting. Not to say it's meaningless, but extending thanks in writing makes it more intentional, more thoughtful, a sort of archived gratitude that doesn't expire, a moment you could return to. So I think that's really, really important and really key in doing something on a positive to make yourself stand out, to make yourself remembered, and to let them know that you're very interested in them. In a couple of days, I would, if you haven't heard from them, 2 or 3 days, if you hadn't heard from them, contact the practice if you're truly interested and let them know you still are interested. That, maybe you're doing some other interviews, but, you have a great interest in this practice. So let them know that. Don't be afraid to. If you're not really happy with them, don't bother doing that. Just and the thank you note, I still would do it. I would just say, hey, thank you for the interview. I really appreciate your time. So even if you're not really overly interested in the practice, a little thank you note doesn't take more than about 2, 3 minutes to write. And again, with that business card, Mary at the front desk was wonderful. She greeted me. I really appreciate having her there, and it was nice to meet everybody in your practice. So if they ask you for a working interview, and I'm not really in love with working interviews, there's a lot of controversy about this. If anybody's on dental nachos, I think there's stuff about that all the time, the good and the bad of working interviews. Know this, there's a couple of things that are very important to them, is that you need to have liability insurance. So that means you have to have your license. You have to have liability insurance that will cover you in case anything goes wrong. God forbid something happens and there's a suit, you're the one that's responsible. So you have to have liability insurance. Now, whether they have a liability insurance that can put you on, or if they want to pay for a liability insurance, and there's the PDA actually has, I think for $50 the first year out, there's a policy that you can get for insurance, really inexpensive. So I would look into that, but make sure you have liability insurance. I don't think anybody should work for free. If you want to, that's fine. But I really think that if you're going to be there for 4 hours or 8 hours, whatever the time limit is, that you should be compensated for that. And you can set that ahead of time. I'd like to get $100 an hour for me to be there for this working interview, or 125, whatever you want to say. And this should be in writing. Okay. And it should be signed by both parties, because a verbal agreement is as good as the paper it's written on, right? So make sure that if you do a working interview, you have a liability insurance compensation, put this in writing, know the expectation of what you're going to be seeing. You shouldn't be, doing an endo on a working interview. You should probably be doing restorative, simple stuff like that. So that's important that you know that. All right. So just to kind of give you a tease for the next lecture, which again is on Tuesday, the 8th at 7:30, same time. A lot of things that you need to talk about and need to understand if you're offered a contract. So how long is the contract for? Is it good for a year? Is it good for 2 years? Does it renew automatically, or do you have to renew it every year? And is there a time limit for the time that you have to let them know in advance that you want to renew or terminate the contract? How are you compensated? Is it going to be on a salary? Is it going to be on collection? Is it going to be on production? Is it going to be a percentage? There's different methods of compensation. We're going to talk about that. I mentioned earlier, what days of the week, what's the hours, so what's the location. You may find that the practice has 2 or 3 locations, and you might be rotating around all 3 of those practices. If that's the case, you know that there's a restrictive covenant that will probably be attached to that, and that restrictive covenant may overlap and make that larger area than you first expected. So let's say a 10-mile, 2-year restrictive covenant. Well, if they have another practice that's 5 miles away and another one practice that's 5 miles from that becomes a much wider circle of your restrictive covenant. Again, on call, after hours, any emergencies, how are those handled? Any benefits that the practice provides to you as an employee? And is there an employee manual? And again, I talked about the restrictive covenant again. How long is that? Is it reasonable as far as length of time and the distance that it goes to? Is there going to be equipment and supplies for you? Are they going to provide a dental assistant? Obviously they should be, but make sure that that's in there. Any administrative responsibilities? Are you responsible for doing anything as far as supervising the staff, ordering supplies, things like that? How are new patients allocated? Is it every other new patient that comes in gets split up among the doctors in the practice? Obviously, if somebody comes in and requests a certain doctor, they're probably going to get that particular doctor. So that needs to be discussed. Any compensation for hygiene exams or any x-rays taken by the hygienist, if you're going to be involved with the hiring of any new staff, and if the practice wants to do a buyout or a buy-in, if they want you to buy in as a partner after a certain amount of time, or buy them out completely and buy the practice, what's the timeline for that? So that's some of the things that I'm going to kind of talk about. And then practice transition, if there's any real estate or a lease that's involved in that has to be addressed as well. So that's the kind of summary of the interview presentation tonight. And again, a little bit of tease about next week's presentation. I think you'll find that one to be pretty interesting, pretty complex, but a good one to look at this time in your careers. So I'm going to turn this back over to Amanda to finish up the presentation. Make sure you are unmuted, Amanda, and we'll go from there. But thank you all for being here tonight. I appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you all for coming. And if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we can go over them after. So first things, Connections Mentoring Program. This is a program that the Pennsylvania Dental Association has where you can get matched with a mentor based on your location, specialty you're going into, and practice type. We have a bunch of students in this program already. If you would like to request a mentor, please go to the link on the screen here at www.padental.org/connections.
I'll leave that up for a few seconds in case anybody wants to write that down or again, take a photo or a screenshot.
Thank you for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
You can go to the next slide.
Sure. Let me give it a second here. There we go.
So this is Dr. Calcaterra's next webinar on Tuesday, April 8th, same time at 7:30, Associate Agreements and Contracts. He already gave you a little bit of information about it. This is another really amazing webinar, so feel free to scan the QR code to register if you haven't already, and you should also be getting an email about it in the future as well. We'll leave this up.
All right.
And then Karen Stievelman, she is working at Penn Veterinary, sorry. She's doing the CV Success webinar on April 23rd at 7:30. This is all about learning how to improve your resumes and your CVs. This is another really wonderful webinar, so feel free to scan that QR code to join.
Yeah, again, I encourage you to do that one as well. I haven't seen that one. In fact, Amanda, if you can invite me, I'd like to see if I could get in on that a little bit just to see what she has to say. Not going to steal her stuff, but it could be very interesting to see what she thinks about photographs on there. So again, I don't think they're a bad idea, but she's more the expert on that. So if she feels differently, then take her advice.
Yeah, she has a really wonderful presentation. And thank
Great.
you all for joining. There is going to be a post-event survey. I will send that to your emails probably tomorrow. You'll receive an Amazon gift card for completing it. So please do so if you see the email. And there was a question in the chat. Oh, someone asked if we could get a recording of tonight's webinar. I will send the recording out as well. So that will go out in the post-event email. So just be on the lookout either tomorrow or the next day. So yeah. If there's
Yeah,
no
I know this presentation I gave the last couple of years, and that's on the PDA website as well. So, and I apologize for the ums and but that's just my style of speaking. So,
Yes,
again, thank you.
this webinar is already on our YouTube, and today's will also be uploaded to our YouTube. There's other webinars on there as well in case you can't make any in the future. So feel free to check out our YouTube as well. And someone else did have a question. If we should not talk about salary on the first interview, how would I know if this is really a good fit for me? I would not like to keep moving forward on the process if compensation isn't favorable.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think that within a couple of days of the interview, you should understand if they're going to offer you a position and then go from there. It might come up, but what's more important about the fit? Is it the salary or is it about the practice itself? Is it a welcoming environment or is it a high-paced, cold environment? And if that's again, if that's what you want, but I think the salary to me would be secondary. So like when I was the program director at the Lehigh Valley Health Network, I'd go on presentations to the schools to kind of promote our program. And there's different salaries based on where you go for your residency program. But what's more important is that, I'm a say 44 size jacket, okay? So that jacket has to fit me. I have to feel comfortable in it. Now, what that jacket costs me is maybe secondary to how comfortable I am. And I think that's the way you have to approach it is to see if this practice fits you as far as your philosophy, what you see, how you're treated, how other people are treated in the practice before you talk about the money. And again, within a couple of days, if you're very interested, they will, and you ask for a contract, they'll certainly send you that with the compensation package in there. So that's just my thought. That's it. Good.
Are there any other questions?
Great. Thank you all. I really appreciate again your time and we'll hope to see you next week. Have a
Yep,
great
thank
week.
you.
Enjoy.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Dr. Calcaterra, for your wonderful presentation, and I hope to see you all next week.